be here tonight. And I did want to say that some of you got to meet my husband, Dan Barry, a month or so ago. And he would be here tonight if he weren't in California. He's in California teaching right now. So I guess that's a good enough excuse. I wanted to tell you a few stories tonight. And I wanted to start with a story about one of my students. Am I talking too fast for you? Okay. I had a student. She was an older woman, come back to school, and she was taking a general science class with me. I teach biology at Mount Holyoke. And she was a good student, but about 3 or 4 weeks into the semester, this student said to me, I don't think I can continue with the class. And I said, well, why not? And she said, because I don't know enough math. And I said, but there's not really that much math in the class. You just have to know how to multiply. And she said, I know, but I don't know how to multiply. She said, when I was in school, the teachers told me that I had no head for math, and I never learned any. I don't know how to multiply. So I said to her, well, that shouldn't stop us. You come to my office on Friday afternoon, and I'll teach you how to multiply. So she said, all right. So Friday afternoon came along. She came to my office, and she was really nervous. That was obvious to me. So I thought, well, I won't start right in with a multiplication lesson. I'll just chat with her. So I asked her what her hobbies were. And she brightened up and she said, well, actually, I quilt. I make quilts. And my quilts win prizes at fairs. I'm an expert quilter. So I had an idea. And I drew a picture of a quilt on a piece of paper. And it had 3 columns and 2 rows. A 3x2 quilt. And I said to her, it's a 3x2 quilt. How many squares? And she said immediately 6. Okay. I drew another quilt. This one had 7 columns and 8 rows. I said 7x8. How many squares? She said 56. So I put down my pencil and I said, I have a quilt that's 12 columns by 12 rows. How many squares? She goes, 144. I said, you don't have any problem with math. You know how to multiply. And she said, that's not multiplication. That's quilting. Do you see what had happened? Here was a student that had been indoctrinated from the start that she had no head for math, that she couldn't do math. And even though she could end up multiplying faster than most anyone I know, she never realized that this skill was multiplication. She just thought it had to do with quilting. That's what happens when you've been indoctrinated with false beliefs by people in authority. Well, I know all about that myself because I was indoctrinated with quite a number of false beliefs as a child. I was born or developed in early infancy a visual condition, crossed eyes. You've probably seen people with crossed eyes. If I looked at you with my right eye, my left eye turned in by a good 30 degrees and looked someplace else. And I alternated my eyes. So sometimes I'd look at you with the right eye, and sometimes I'd look at you with the left eye, and the right eye would turn in. Well, think about this. Most people, when they see the world, their 2 eyes are aimed at the same place at the same time. So the 2 eyes are bringing into the brain the same picture of the world. And your brain merges those 2 images and allows you to see the world in rich detail and also to see it in 3 dimensions, like when you go to Avatar or some of the other 3D movies. But because I didn't aim my 2 eyes at the same place, because one was looking here and one was looking over there, my brain was receiving 2 very different pictures of the world from the 2 eyes. And this made for a very confusing way of life. And I did eventually learn how to cope with it by sort of ignoring the information from one eye. But the result was my vision was very unstable. It was very slow. I was a clumsy kid. I was awkward. I bumped into things. I had a hard time learning to bicycle and an even harder time learning to drive. The worst of all is that I had a hard time learning to read. The letters seemed to swim on the page. They didn't stay in one place. Well, you all know about standardized tests. Those of you who have just taken the GED, you know those little bubbles you have to fill in? Well, they're not that easy to fill in when your eyes are not, when you're constantly switching between which eye. And so at the end of second grade, I took one of those tests, standardized tests, a test that's objective. It's supposed to give a real idea of what your intelligence is. And I bombed it. So picture this. I'm now entering third grade. It's September of 1963. And I go into the class, and I'm in a class with a lot of the kids from a neighborhood. And all of a sudden, the assistant principal walks in. And she looks at me, and she points at me, and she calls my name. She tells me to stand up, and she says, "You're in the wrong class. You belong in Mrs. Danner's class." And then she says to the boy sitting next to me, "I want you to take Susan's desk and move it with her to Mrs. Danner's class." So I got up, and I walked out, and I still can remember the sound of that desk scraping against the floor as I was banished from the classroom. Now, it was not a nice thing to end up in Mrs. Danner's class. Why? Well, our school had 4 classes for each grade. There was the class for the very smart kids, or those who were thought to be very smart. There was the class for those kids who were thought to be average. There was the class for those kids who were thought to be below average. And then there was Mrs. Danner's class, which were for all the kids who were, well, abnormal. Everybody in my class had a problem, and it was clear to all of us. Some kids had behavior problems, some kids had physical disabilities, and some had physical abnormalities. My best friend in the class was a boy who had polio and walked with a limp. Did he have a problem reading? I don't think so, but it didn't matter because he wasn't normal. Well, my mom went in to talk to the principal and asked her what was up. And the principal took out the standardized test and said, "Look, these are the scores. This test is scientific and objective." And when my mom protested, he looked at her and he said, and I'll quote exactly what he said, "I think you need to face facts. Your daughter is a dim bulb." Well, my mom never believed him, but she never forgot his words. And she taught me how to read when the schools gave up on me. And eventually I became a good student. And eventually I went to college. And when I went to college, I hit another brick wall, another false belief. Because you see, I decided to go into science. And as I was taking my science classes, I learned that my visual condition, technically called infantile esotropia, but what that means is cross-eyed since the beginning of life. That technically my condition, even though I had these surgeries that made my eyes look more or less normal, technically what my condition meant that I would never have normal vision. That I would always see the world as flat, because I didn't see it with 2 eyes, that my vision would always be unstable. And there was nothing, no how that could be done about it because my brain had rewired itself in infancy in a different way because of my cross-eyes. And I accepted this belief. Why? Well, because the scientists who proclaimed this won the Nobel Prize. And because all these esteemed doctors, including my surgeon from Yale University Hospital, said that this was the case. So there was nothing I could do about it. So I moved on. Until my late 40s. And then in my late 40s, my vision continued to trouble me even more. When I looked in the distance, everything would jitter. I couldn't, I was teaching in my classroom to a class of about 100 kids. And my teacher asked me, why didn't I ever talk or call on the kids in the back of the class when they raised their hand? And I said to her, what kids? It wasn't that I couldn't see them. Because actually, if you measured each eye separately, I had 20/20 acuity. But it was difficult for me to look in the distance because of the jitteriness, so I never did look very far away. So I never noticed them. And so I finally decided I'm going to go see eye doctor But I'm going to go see a special type of eye doctor, one who really specializes in vision rehabilitation, vision therapy, and binocular vision, how you see with the two eyes. And so I went to see a developmental optometrist, a woman named Teresa Ruggiero, who's right up north of here in Northampton. And she said to me, we can help stabilize your gaze. What I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you something that you all learned, or most of you all learned, by the time you were 6 months old. And that is how to point the two eyes at the same place at the same time. Well, it wasn't easy for me to learn this. I went through vision therapy sessions once a week and practiced exercises every day at home for 30 minutes. And often when I was in my therapy sessions, there was another person having therapy at the same time, and it was usually a 5-year-old. So it was me and the 5-year-old. But I knew that if I was going to learn to see differently, I really had to start all the way from the beginning. I had to relearn how to see from as if from infancy on. And I did. Through a lot of practice and a lot of support, I relearned how to see, how to aim my two eyes at the same place at the same time, and my view changed dramatically. All that instability, looking in the distance, went away. And more than that, I began to see in 3 dimensions. I began to see the palpable volumes of space between things. Things that I didn't know I didn't see. When I looked in the mirror, all of a sudden my reflection wasn't on the plane of the mirror anymore, but behind it, the way other people saw it. I began to understand when Lewis Carroll wrote the book Through the Looking Glass what he meant. When I looked at trees, their canopies were round, and I could see how the outer branches captured and enclosed whole volumes of space through which the inner branches permeated, penetrated. It was an amazing transformation. But the transformation wasn't just in my vision. The transformation was in my whole self. Because when I began to see like a normal person, I gained a tremendous amount of confidence. I went out and talked about my story. I convinced other scientists about it and about their old beliefs about the brain rewiring and never being able to change were not true. I wrote a book. You know, people say it's wrong to give others false hope. But it's equally wrong, or maybe even worse, to give people false hopelessness. My student, the one who was the quilter who couldn't multiply, she'd been given a heavy dose of false hopelessness. I had been given a heavy dose of false hopelessness as well. And I know quite a number of you in the audience have been victims of false hopelessness as well. I know that in part because I read the letters he wrote to my husband after he came and talked here about a month ago. Your education can be just as transformative as my vision. And in fact, I know with your GED credentials now, you might be able to be better positioned in your job, or get a new job, or go on to college. You know, at Mount Holyoke, we have a program, the Francis Perkins program for older women, like the student I mentioned earlier. And when they come to the classroom, they come with a whole wealth of experience that the younger students don't have. And so it probably shouldn't surprise you that they're always my favorite students. Don't let anyone tell you what it is you cannot do. Set for yourself your own goals. Achieve them in small steps by working hard and practicing a lot. And most important, and this is very important, associate yourself with people who support your ideas and your goals and your dreams. People who encourage you, don't dismiss what it is that you want to do. Well, it's been an honor to talk to you tonight. I'm inspired by what you've accomplished. And I want to wish you great success in the future.